These are racist ideas, race-baiting ideas, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-women, all key tenets making up the emerging racist ideology known as the alt-right. Now, alt-right is short for alternative right. The Wall Street Journal describes it as a loose but organized movement, mostly online, that rejects mainstream conservatism, promotes nationalism, and views immigration and multiculturalism as threats to white identity.
When they become the majority, they will vote in their own interests. They won't vote in white Americans' interests. So
what is
white people have a legitimate...
Wait, what is a white American interest? Can you give me an example of, like, white American legislation or white American...
My friend...
It's easy to think of the alt-right as the foil character of the far left, that they're the equal and opposite of black and brown identity politics or feminist identity politics. Labeling this alt-right phenomenon as a movement is to commit a misnomer. Movements have goals. Movements have beginnings and movements have ends. The alt-right does not exactly fit those criteria. You could say that their goals are an ethno-state, that their beginnings are the Great Recession, and that the ends are the security of what they see as the white race, but this is not realistic. The ideological roots are older than the label itself. Their waxing poetic about a post-diverse world ignores the reality that the internet and intercontinental travel have merged us together in inseparable ways. Their ahistorical idea of whiteness only proves the liberal argument that race is a socially constructed concept. It would be a mistake to fall into the trap of defining them by that criteria, since alt-right can mean different things to different people. To me, they're simply white supremacists. They'll never outright say they are supremacists. They'll simply say they're white identitarians because, frankly, it sounds better. Some will define the alt-right by race realism, but this is a poor descriptor as well. It might be true that every alt-righter is necessarily a race realist, but this is not the same as saying that every race realist is an alt-righter. They're defined almost exclusively by few criteria, and everything from there is up to an individual's interpretation. They are typically white, they are typically nationalist. But beyond that, one must use one's own intuition in determining what necessarily qualifies as alt-right. There is no need to take my word for it either. Ask them yourself and you'll find varying degrees of interpretation as to what necessarily constitutes as alt-right. For example, I've met a self-professed alt-righter who had a black girlfriend. Tara McCarthy calls herself alt-right, while simultaneously being of mixed race and a descendant of victims of the Holocaust. Nick Fuentes once stated that he identifies as spiritually white. There is no one unifying value that determines one in being alt-right, save for their singular commitment to a white in-group bias. The word is meaningless, as Tara McCarthy demonstrated in a debate with Destiny when she said that Jews could be white if they share white values, despite her position being a direct contradiction with Richard Spencer's proposition that Jews cannot be white for their rejection of white identity.
Okay, so let me ask this one more time. Let's see if I can get yes or no. Let's say you have a group of 100 Jewish people, and they actually consider themselves white. Do you consider them white then? White enough for your ethno-state?
I wouldn't have a problem with these people so long as they are not practicing in-group preference for their own group.
Well, they would consider themselves white, so they would be for the whole white group.
Yeah, if they're in-group preference for whites,
okay.
And
what if
they
you
look
had...
white, act white, etc., that's fine by me.
Are Jews white?
No, Jews are not white. Jews are Jews. And if we define white as European, that is connected with the peoples of Europe, of, you could say, Western civilization. It's really European civilization because it's not just of the West. Jews are not European fundamentally. They have a fundamentally different consciousness, a sense of themselves, and a different story.
Even Eastern
Hanukkah,
European Ashkenazi Jews who are from Europe, as you're saying, they're also not white.
No, I include all three branches of the Jewish family, the Mizrahim, the Sephardic Jews, and Ashkenazi Jews. No, they are not white.
This is a gambit. Leaving the alt-right to be ill-defined allows one to insert their own ideas as to what constitutes as alt-right themselves, a fact that the alt-right can rely on. If you call them supremacists, they will deny this. They will say they do not believe in the superiority of whites, just that whites are different from blacks. They will do this while simultaneously attributing every bad characteristic they can to blacks, from criminality to IQ, or remarking every woe that befalls whites as an elaborate conspiracy by the Jews. Call them fascists and they will retort how libertarian they actually are. They don't want to deport minorities, you see, or even tell people how to live. They just want to control their border, as any sovereign nation should. This is relied upon to bind the alt-right together in a vague commitment to identity that is never in itself explored in a way that would satisfy anybody's idea of alt-right. The one-drop rule is considered by some a meme not worth engaging with, but it's actually a very important question. If one can be white simply by culturally identifying as white, then pray tell what value or meaning that term actually carries. What value is instilled in white identity if brown people can just adopt it? Beyond the alt-right's meme warfare is an ideology of white nationalism, one which seeks to attract a certain demographic of typically white, socially disenfranchised internet edgelords who can be inspired and propagandized too using irony, co-optation, and assimilation. A shared sense of identity ties them together, but that bond is fragile. Ask one person within the alt-right to define white culture and see how that differs from another. Push the question further back. Just what is white culture? Are we to pretend that there's a genetic component tying the culture of the French to the Irish? Of the white Republican to the white Democrat? Of the white progressive with the white conservative? These concepts have been occasionally dog-whistled as Western culture, a wide net capturing basically everything good about Europe, such as a belief in ill-defined values that mostly everybody would agree is important, but nobody would share the same definition of. Free speech is an example of just this, but precisely what does that entail? I've lived in the West my entire life. Is the alt-right's idea of free speech the same as my idea of free speech? If so, then what is there to explain Richard Spencer's proclamation that the alt-rights are not pro-free speech? Western values is never narrowed down, and that's intentional. Keeping the term as vague and wide as possible is a convenient catch-all that allows anybody attracted or sympathetic to the movement to insert their own idea of what that is, without ever actually challenging this idea. It's propaganda. Another brilliance in alt-right propaganda techniques is to not conform to the long-established idea of what a white nationalist is, in terms of mainstream looks. White robes fell out of fashion. No longer is a shaved head used. Instead, they approach politics through a neatly dressed front of polished propaganda outlets, such as the National Policy Institute, the American Renaissance, Mankind Quarterly, or the Center for Immigration Studies. They use articulate speakers to push this message, such as Richard Spencer, Jared Taylor, and a variety of internet personalities to amplify this message further.
It's increasingly popular to talk about the alternative right, or alt-right.
What is the alt-right? I get asked this question a lot, so I'm going to try to go through it real fast, because I think everyone assumed that there's a bunch of Nazi nuts who aren't going to do anything, and then Trump was their Hitler, and then they won, so they go, wait a minute, 50% of the country can't be Nazis. Maybe I got this alt-right thing wrong. Yeah, you did.
I think that white identity and white nationalism is a little misleading. I think it's more accurate to say that the alt-right cares about Western supremacy rather than white supremacy. It cares about Western values. It cares about liberal, capitalist, Western democracy.
Personally, I think that the regressive left is more of a threat to our democracy than the alt-right.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?